am I? If you met me today, you might see a woman in her late 20s with a steady voice, self-assured eyes, and a quick, reliable smile. My name is Hannah Leung, and I just turned 28 last spring. I was born and raised in Seattle, Washington, where morning fog softens the city skyline and endless gray days blur into each other. My parents are immigrants from Vietnam who came to America carrying nothing but their stubborn optimism and the stories of a home they had to leave behind. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood, sandwiched between evergreen pines and crowded rows of modest houses. As the eldest daughter, I helped my mother in the kitchen, folding dumplings and listening to the radio, and helped my father with his English homework after he returned from the night shift at the fish market. In our house, quiet was safety, and family was everything, even if sometimes that meant biting my tongue or shrinking my own dreams to fit the ones my parents had carried across the oceans. People at school always said I was the smart one, the girl who aced her tests but barely spoke in class unless called upon. I coped by memorizing rap lyrics and scribbling poetry on the backs of my notebooks, by pouring myself into track meets and volunteer work, and pretending I was just like everyone else. But below it all, I always wondered if I truly belonged. I was American, but sometimes my reflection seemed split down the middle, part hometown girl, part someone else entirely. My family stood at the center of my world. For better or for worse, I had an older brother, Andrew, the golden child, a figure larger than life in both my parents' eyes and my own. I wanted to believe, with every ounce of my being, that family meant loyalty, safety, and unconditional love. But as I eventually learned, the reality was more complicated and much, much darker than I'd ever imagined. Now, looking back on all those years, I can tell you, I am not the same Hannah I was as a child, staring out the window and dreaming of escape. I have been broken apart and put myself back together, piece by piece. If there's one thing you should know about me before reading the rest of this story, it's that my path was never as smooth or as simple as you might expect. This is not just a story about loss or family or betrayal. It's about finding myself in the spaces between and learning, at last, who I am, the shadows of childhood. Growing up, I used to look at my brother Andrew like he was made of gold, 6 years older than me. He was the standard against which everything in our house was measured. His successes, his laughter, even his silences seemed to reassure my parents that they had done something right. For years, I tried to ignore the jaggedness I sometimes felt in his presence, how he could switch from gentle and protective to cold and dismissive with the smallest provocation. My room was down the hall from his. At night, the house would settle into stillness, our parents already exhausted from work, the TV's distant hum replaced by the quiet creaks of an old house cooling after a long day. I always felt safest in that silence, until the night that changed everything, the night Andrew slipped into my room when I was just 14 years old. It's hard to make sense of fear when your mind is still so young. Harder still to find the words to even name what's happening. What happened that night wasn't something I could process. My body froze, my throat locked. In our family, we didn't talk about our feelings, let alone admit the existence of things too ugly to imagine. I didn't know that what was happening had a name beyond shame or guilt. I blamed myself, then tried to forget. For weeks, and then months, I carried a secret that threatened to swallow me whole, a sickly weight in my stomach I couldn't shake. From the outside, our household looked unchanged. Andrew smiled at the breakfast table, ribbed me about my messy hair, called me kiddo, in the hallways at school. But inside, I felt like I was shrinking away from everything and everyone. The shadows grew longer each time I saw him, and the darkness crept into my dreams. The Hannah my classmates knew, lively, eager, always volunteering, was becoming someone else. Quieter, withdrawn, brittle as glass. My parents never noticed, or maybe, deep down, they chose not to notice. The golden child couldn't hurt anyone, least of all his own sister. Each day, I waited for the courage to speak up, terrified that my words would shatter the fragile peace of our family. In my mind, the fear wasn't just of Andrew, but of losing everything I'd ever been taught was safe and true. I began to wonder if love was always tangled up with secrets, or if family loyalty could ever be stronger than the shadows that haunted our home. Turning point, the first accusation. There's a kind of quiet that settles in a home when everyone is pretending nothing is wrong. After what happened with Andrew, that silence wasn't comforting anymore. It felt like standing on the edge of a frozen lake, terrified that the ice would crack beneath you. I spent months living with that fear and uncertainty, shrinking myself down to invisibility, praying that maybe, if I was careful and quiet enough, it would all just fade into some bad dream. But dreams always end, and real life has a way of demanding to be faced. It was the start of my sophomore year of high school, when the pressure inside me finally began to crack. Maybe it was the way Andrew smiled in family photos, as if nothing had ever happened, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder for the camera. Maybe it was the way my mother praised him every day for his grades, his job, his relentless responsibility, the man of the house, now that my father's health was declining. Or maybe it was just the fact that I was tired of being scared, tired of feeling alone in my own skin when I heard his footsteps in the hallway. I spent nights memorizing every detail of my room, where the slant of sunlight fell in the morning, how the peeling sticker on my dresser curled up at the edge, the shoebox under my bed where I kept my detentions and straight A test papers next to a tangle of friendship bracelets and unsent letters. Sometimes I'd clutch a baseball from Little League, something ordinary, something solid, and feel its weight in my palm, trying to remind myself that I was still here, still real. The first person I dared to hint at the truth was Mrs. Myers, my history teacher. She was one of those rare people whose eyes actually listened when you spoke, whose voice could fill a room with comfort. One afternoon after class, I lingered at my desk long after the bell rang, scribbling random lines on my notebook until the classroom emptied out. She asked if I was okay, and the words that came out weren't a confession, not yet, but enough for her to see the tremor in my hands. "How are things at home?" she asked gently, her tone so different from my parents' brisk, tired voices. I almost lied, but what came out was, "Sometimes I get really scared for no reason." The moment etched itself into my memory. The pause, her furrowed brow, the way she leaned in as if to take some of my burden onto herself. She encouraged me to come see her during lunch or whenever I needed to. She never pushed for more than I could give. But slowly,
Hannah,
I started sharing the edges of my pain, never quite naming Andrew or what he did, but speaking about nightmares and feeling unsafe. She listened. She let the silence exist between us, making space for me to feel what I needed to feel, never rushing me or asking too much. It took another 3 months before I was ready to tell my mother. I still remember that evening, the brittle tension in the kitchen as I set the table, the sound of rain battering the old windows. My heart hammered so hard in my chest, I thought for sure she could hear it. I swallowed hard, reminded myself that this was my moment, the only one I had. I tried to choose my words carefully. I said I needed to talk to her privately. She glanced at the clock, worried about dinner burning, but agreed. When the words finally spilled out, they were clumsy and halting, and I couldn't meet her eyes. Mom, something happened with Andrew. The shame and fear tangled up in my throat, almost choking me. But I forced myself to keep going, to name the unthinkable, to break the wall of silence that kept me captive. I told her about the night in my room, about the flash of terror I'd buried under so many days of pretending. I told her I needed her help, that I needed for someone to believe me. I will never forget the look on her face. At first, disbelief, a rapid, almost panicked denial. Andrew, your brother. No, sweetheart, he'd never. You must be confused. Maybe you had a nightmare. But as I persisted, her expression hardened. Lines formed around her mouth. Her voice, clipped and cold, in a way I'd never heard before. Don't say things like that about your family. You know how hard things are for us right now. You must have misunderstood. Don't ruin everything. The world didn't end that night, but something inside me did. The warmth I'd always associated with home was replaced by a bone-deep chill I couldn't shake. I'd always known that family, in our culture, meant loyalty above all else. We were supposed to protect each other, to defend our own, no matter the cost. But I hadn't been prepared for what came next. My mom's refusal to believe me, her muted anger, the way she urged me to keep quiet, for everyone's sake. In the days that followed, she confided in my father, whose eyes filled with a pain I hadn't seen since we lost our business years before. But he, too, retreated into silence. The air at home became thick with unspoken words. I tiptoed through rooms as if my footsteps could crack the fragile surface of peace. And Andrew, he avoided me for days, then greeted me with a casual, infuriating normalcy that suggested nothing had happened. That was almost worse than his original betrayal. The sense that my pain was invisible, unremarkable, easier to ignore than confront. My mother's words followed me everywhere. She called my confession an accusation, said it could destroy our family, that in this country, people like us couldn't afford shame or scandal. We've sacrificed so much to build this life, Hannah, she whispered late one night, tears in her eyes. Are you willing to tear it all down? It was then that I realized the true price of telling the truth. I wanted to believe that love would be strong enough to hold us together, that my family would rally around me the way my classmates' families did when their lives fell apart. But for us, the cost of breaking silence was exile, not comfort. I became the outcast in my own home, a pariah for daring to speak the truth. But even in that darkness, a part of me was relieved. The secret was out now. Ugly as it was, it had a shape. It existed outside the prison of my own mind. I started seeing the school counselor. I let Mrs. Myers recommend a helpline. I journaled furiously in the dead of night, scribbling and shredding pages, trying to write myself back into existence. The first accusation didn't break my brother's golden image, at least not then. It broke something in me. The illusion that family was always safe, always good, always worthy of trust. It taught me that sometimes being brave means being alone, standing your ground even when everyone you love turns away. Looking back now, I wish I could tell that terrified 16-year-old that her pain was real, that her voice mattered, no matter how many people refused to hear her. In the end, it was that refusal, not just Andrew's betrayal, that shaped the woman I have become. And even now, Years later, I wonder if I hadn't spoken up then, would I have ever found the courage to speak up again? The cost of truth is high, but the cost of silence is higher. The silent years, high school blurred into a string of empty days and sleepless nights. I moved through the motions like a ghost, perfecting the art of silence. My family, wounded or willfully blind, stopped asking questions. The rift between us grew into a canyon. Mom's eyes slid over me at dinner. Dad made small talk about the news. Lisa, too young to understand, retreated behind books and late-night phone calls, pretending the world was fine. At school, I constructed a different life, one built on borrowed resilience and fierce independence. I joined yearbook, forced myself to try cross-country, hid in the library during lunch. Friends like Amanda and Jay began to notice I'd changed. Amanda cornered me after psych class, telling me gently she was there if I wanted to talk. Jay lent me his notes and an old Smith's playlist, claiming both could help a soul heal. Their concern pulled me back from the edge, even on the worst days. Nighttime was the hardest. My mind replayed memories, Eric's shadow at my door, my mother's eyes glazed with denial, the sense of drowning in a world built on secrets. I filled journals with angsty fragments and broken sentences, trying to put distance between myself and the pain. Some nights, the only thing that helped was standing at the window, watching battered city buses go by, counting their headlamps as proof of life, continuing outside my own small tragedy. My grades dipped, then soared. I poured everything into AP classes, as if achievement could fill the hole left by my family's absence. College counselors asked about my personal statement. I dodged, wrote about resilience and hope, code words for my own endurance. I won a scholarship to the University of Illinois, packed my bags, and swore I would never return unless I was whole again. College brought its own challenges. Trusting people was nearly impossible. For months I went to class, work, and the grocery store in silence. But over time, I let new friends like Chloe and Marcus in. Chloe got it. Her parents were divorced. She understood family fractures. Marcus made me laugh so hard, I almost forgot my nightmares. I went to therapy for the first time, terrified but determined. Each session was a revelation. The cost of silence, the hunger to be heard, the seedlings of self-forgiveness. Still, holidays felt like a faint bruise. Phone calls home became stilted. My mother asked about grades. My dad remarked how grown up my voice sounded. Eric was never mentioned. Not in anger, not in regret, not at all. Sometimes I wondered if their lives were easier without my presence. Sometimes I thought, maybe that's the price of opening your mouth in a family built on quiet. I made it to graduation with honors. When I walked across the stage, I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt weightless, unmoored by everything I'd lost, but strangely at peace with all I had survived. Those silent years rebuilt me, but not into someone cold. They taught me how to listen, how to see pain in others, and, gradually, how to let go of the shame that was never mine to hold. People see me now as assertive, even bold. They don't know silence is always at my back, shaping every word I choose to say. The truth comes out. I always thought that secrets, like wounds, might fade with time, or at least settle beneath the surface, where they could be ignored. For years, I lived on, turning my world at a distance from my family, focusing on my college classes, part-time jobs, and stringing together a handful of friends who became something like a safety net for the days when memories threatened to resurface. Still, even as I pressed forward, there was a strange, unspoken dependency on silence, a stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, the past would stay buried if I didn't poke at it. But the truth, I would learn, has a way of getting out, regardless of how deep you try to hide it. Sometimes it's a whisper, other times it's a storm. It began with a message, one that arrived unexpectedly in my inbox during an ordinary Thursday in the middle of April. I was 25, living in Chicago, piecing together a life that felt fragile, but finally my own. The sender's name was unrecognizable, but the subject line splintered something inside me. You don't know me, but I think we share a story. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The words inside hit like a cold wave. A woman named Jenny explained that she had dated Andrew for the past year, and, after months of confusion and shattered boundaries, had finally found the courage to leave him. She, too, had experienced his darkness, and she wasn't the only one. Through online forums and late-night conversations, she discovered more women, names I'd never heard, all echoing the same story of manipulation, control, and subtle, insidious violence. Jenny had found me through a whisper network, fueled by women who refused to stay quiet any longer. Reading her message, I felt a dozen things at once: rage, sorrow, vindication, and a sickening relief. I wasn't alone. My pain had company. Suddenly, every late-night panic, every memory I'd tried to stamp out, felt like pieces in a terrible pattern that was only now coming into focus. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't to blame. For days, I walked through the city in a fog, replaying Jenny's words and the stories of the other women she connected me with. We started emailing, first tentatively, then with growing urgency. We shared experiences and compared language, the little rituals Andrew used to establish control. Some of the details were chillingly familiar, others unique, but threaded through with the same note of fear and betrayal. When I finally called Jenny, our voices shook but never faltered. We promised each other this would not stay hidden any longer. My next move was the hardest. I had spent so many years wanting to never see Andrew again, never hear his name. Yet now, it wasn't only about my pain. It was about others. It was about responsibility. I owed it to those women, to myself, and maybe, strangely, even to the family that had refused to see me, to finally peel back every layer of buried truth. Reaching out to my parents felt like an ancient wound I was digging open. I wrote a long letter to my mother, unable to face her voice on the phone. I told her what Jenny and the others had revealed, the patterns that stretched years past my own trauma. I was clinical, unemotional, listing what I knew, offering names, screenshots, and testimonies. I told her that silence had hurt more than just me now. I told her I needed her to listen, not as a mother, but as someone who claimed to love the truth. The response was weighted silence. Days passed with no word. A family group chat where no one posted. Then, without warning, my younger cousin Lisa called me late at night. Her voice was raw, full of both confusion and anguish. She'd heard from my aunt, rumors spreading through the extended family. "Is it true?" she asked, almost whispering, as if the walls could hear. For the first time, I found myself speaking openly to another member of the family, laying out the facts, not just my own ordeal, but the pattern of Andrew's betrayal. Lisa cried, and I cried too, but there was a fragile new clarity in her words. "I believe you. I wish I had known sooner." The next weeks unfolded like slow-motion chaos. My mother eventually called, her voice colder than I remembered. "Your brother says the women are lying. He says you're behind all of this, trying to ruin him." I was tired. "He's said that before, Mom. It isn't just me now. There's a line of women, none of whom know each other, telling the same story. She fell silent. I imagined her, the lines of age and worry deepening on her face, trying to reconcile the golden sun with the pattern of complaint and evidence she could hardly process. She didn't say Andrew's name again during that call. Instead, she asked what I wanted, what I needed. I surprised myself. All I wanted was acknowledgement. I needed my family to see reality for what it was, to stop hiding behind the veneer of tradition and respectability. I wanted someone to finally prioritize the truth over false peace. Meanwhile, the stories continued to unfold. Jenny organized a group video call for the women who had been hurt by Andrew, inviting me to join. We sat in little squares on the screen, each telling her piece. Our stories shook and, at times, overlapped painfully. Some of the women were young, shaken, and struggling to process. Others were older, having spent years in therapy or silence. Together, though, we built a testament, a tapestry that was impossible to ignore. I began to see an unexpected shift in my family's reaction. My father, always the quiet one, called me one Sunday morning and we talked for nearly an hour, mostly about mundane things at first. Work, weather, mundane family drama back home. Eventually, though, he stopped pretending. "Did I fail you, Hannah?" he asked in a hesitant, broken English that reminded me of my childhood. "Did I not keep you safe?" It was the closest he'd ever come to acknowledging what I'd endured. I assured him that the fault was Andrew's and that years of learned silence weren't easy to shake. He apologized, voice trembling, for the hurt caused not just by Andrew, but by their refusal to see and hear me. It wasn't absolution, but somehow it was a beginning, a possibility, however faint, that something broken could begin to heal. Outside my family, the momentum accelerated. Jenny and I worked together to help the women file reports, gather testimony, and strengthen each other's resolve. A small wave of attention rippled through local advocacy circles, stories of Asian American families grappling with intergenerational trauma and the burden of silence. I agreed to speak with a reporter, anonymized at first, then braver and on the record. It was terrifying, but as I watched my words spark conversation and support, I knew I'd done the right thing. The confrontation with Andrew himself was less dramatic than I had pictured all those years. He didn't apologize. He clung to denials, even in the face of evidence, and painted himself as the victim. Watching him now, I felt a strange kind of pity, not for his pain, but for his inability to reckon with the truth, to see himself as we, his victims, now saw him.
Look, we know
For the first time, I saw
tell us what
clearly
happened.
that my responsibility was never to fix him or to fix my family. It was to protect the truth and myself from any more harm. My family will never be the same. I know now that's okay. We tried for too long to patch things over with silence and tradition. Some relatives, like Lisa, have stepped closer, offering warmth and honesty I never knew we could share. Others have retreated, unable to face the new reality, tethered tightly to old ways of thinking. Holidays are quieter. Reunions are laced with tension and uncomfortable silences. But I bring with me the certainty that I did not allow fear to dictate my story. Not this time. More importantly, I am not broken. The girl who was silenced years ago has grown into a woman who refuses to accept the price of peace, bought with suffering. I learned that shame, when carried in isolation, can warp you, but when brought into the light, it can be replaced with power. If you ask me whose fault it was that the truth had to come out this way, I don't blame myself anymore. I do not blame the women who came forward, nor the family members who finally chose to listen. The price of silence was paid not just by one little girl, but by every person Andrew hurt, and by every family member who lost their peace of mind to secrets. Telling the truth wasn't about vengeance. It was about ending a legacy that should never have begun. In the aftermath, I have found an unexpected kinship with the women who walked a similar path. Jenny, whose courage helped spark the reckoning, and dozens more who trusted me with their pain. Our community is unconventional, sometimes messy, always honest. That is what family is supposed to be. A place where truth is not punished, but cherished, where silence does not shield darkness. If there's anything I wish I could tell every young woman who suspects she is alone, it's this: you are not. The truth has a life of its own, and sometimes all it needs is a voice willing to speak. Return and confrontation. Flying back to California after all those years was a decision that simmered inside me for months before it finally boiled over. My mother's email still burned in my inbox, lingering, unanswered. My cousin Lisa had been the only one to reach out since the storm of revelations. Even then, her words were brittle with confusion and pain, neither full rejection nor true welcome. Still, I felt a strange itch to see them in person, to bring my changed self back to the place where I had almost disappeared. The day I stepped off the plane, the San Jose air smelled like sun-warmed concrete and forgotten childhood. I almost laughed at how small everything seemed. The sprawl of the suburbs, the aging Honda my father drove to pick me up from the airport. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles almost white. We exchanged the shallowest of greetings, sitting in silence most of the ride home, as if words might stir up more trouble than either of us could contain. Walking into my parents' house felt like trespassing in a museum. The wallpaper was the same, kitchen tiles still chipped from the year Dad tried to fix the sink. But the overall hush was different, less about comfort, more about the weight of things unsaid. Old pictures lined the walls, but my eyes darted past them, avoiding Andrew's face, even in birthdays long gone by. In the days before the confrontation, I kept to myself, walking through the house the way you walk through a field full of landmines. My old room hadn't changed. My medals hung on the wall. My childhood bedding still clung to the twin mattress. But nothing felt familiar. Everything was both mine and not mine, as if I'd swapped places with a replica of myself long ago. Every interaction with my parents was carefully choreographed. Mom cooked dinner, asked staccato questions about my job, my rent in Chicago, the price of groceries. She never mentioned what had happened. Not Andrew, not the women, not the accusations. Dad was even quieter, his conversations full of faded sports scores and radio news, always steering wide of the craters that bordered our lives. The rest of the family heard about my trip home. Of course, Lisa invited me for coffee one afternoon at a strip mall cafe we used to frequent when we were teenagers. Over iced lattes, she asked if I was scared. Scared isn't the word anymore, I told her. I think all the fear burned itself out. Now, I just want truth. Her face softened. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're the bravest person I know, Hannah, even if they never say it. The family reunion came the next weekend. My aunt's house, the biggest on our block, with a yard shaded by enormous magnolia trees, filled with relatives, a dozen conversations overlapping in English and rapid-fire Vietnamese. I arrived early, hands slick with sweat despite the California heat. Inside, my younger cousins played video games. The older ones hovered near the kitchen, picking at trays of spring rolls and fried dumplings. It didn't take long for the tension to thicken, invisible but relentless. My mother's eyes never quite met mine. My father drifted from room to room, refilling cups and pretending not to notice the way conversations died when I entered. Andrew wasn't there, but his name hovered unspoken, a ghost shuffling between us. After dinner, amid the dull hum of the dishwasher and clatter of children running in the backyard, I asked for everyone's attention. My voice sounded firmer than I felt. Can we sit down for a moment? There are things I want to say. They gathered in hesitant clusters, on the sofa, leaning against walls, piling awkwardly at the edges of the living room. My uncle coughed. My mother's shoulders tightened. I felt everyone's nerves radiating, sharp and jittery. I started quietly, telling them I was not here to start a fight or demand apologies. I was here because the wounds in our family had grown too deep for silence to heal. When truth is buried, I said, it doesn't protect anyone. It becomes poison, slow at first, and then suffocating. Their eyes flickered between each other, uncertain. Some seemed to want to leave. Others looked trapped. But I kept going. I told them the story, my story, again. This time, without shame or euphemism. I told them about the night in my room, about the night terrors that grew into years of sleeplessness, the years I spent blaming myself for the cracks that formed between us. I spoke of the other women, the letters and evidence that had finally forced the truth into the open. I spoke about the helplessness of being a child in a house where pain could be erased with denial, where the cost for honesty was exile from the very people you loved most. My aunt wept. My uncle clenched his fist on his knee, silent. My mother pressed her lips in a paper-thin line, eyes shining but stubbornly hard. She wanted to say something. I nodded, giving her permission to speak. You have no idea, she whispered, voice trembling, how much we sacrificed just to survive here. How could I believe that one of us... She cut off, shaking her head. I nodded, letting the silence stretch between us, like a bridge in need of repair. I had dreamed about this confrontation for years, sometimes imagining it would be cathartic, other times fearing it would end worse than it started. But in that moment, I didn't feel anger so much as a profound ache for all the things my family could never give me, for all the distortions that trauma had etched into our lives. Someone, Lisa, I think, broke the silence. We can't change what happened, but we can choose not to let it go on this way. Her words trembled, but they steadied me. I saw in her expression a deep yearning, maybe hope, maybe just exhaustion, but above all, a willingness to be honest that I'd so often missed among the adults around us. My father finally spoke, his accent thick and his voice barely above a whisper. We wanted to keep family together. We thought, if we say nothing, maybe pain will pass. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders sagging. But pain, it does not pass. It stays and grows. He turned to me, eyes rimmed red. I am sorry I did not listen. Sorry for what you carry. That apology, so simple, almost incomplete, landed deeper than any outburst ever could. It was a crack in the dam. For the first time, I believed he really saw me. Not as a problem, but as his daughter. My mother, always the fortress, at first stayed silent, her jaw clenched. When she finally spoke, her voice came out hoarse. I was afraid for you, for him, for all of us. In Vietnam, there is no room for secrets like this. Here, I thought we could start again. I didn't know how. Then, softer. I wanted to protect you, but I didn't know how. In that moment, I realized they had been as lost as I was. Their denial was armor, their silence, a desperate attempt not to lose everything they'd built since crossing the ocean. But no armor is perfect, and theirs had let my suffering fester. I told her, as gently as I could, "You don't have to know. You just have to listen. You have to let me heal." We sat in quiet, the only sound the muffled laughter of children outside, the whir of the fridge, the air thick with grief and possibility. I closed my eyes, picturing the girl I once was, isolated, shrouded in shame, desperate for a life beyond secrets. I wanted to reach out to her, promise that truth and healing were possible, even if the road was longer and more painful than either of us wanted to admit. After that conversation, the air felt lighter and heavier at the same time. There was no magical transformation, no sudden embrace, no collective weeping that would erase the damage of years. But there was a shift. For the first time, I was not the only one holding the truth. It ceased to be just my burden, something I dragged with me across states and years. It became a scar, shared, seen, ugly, but now part of the family's story, whether they liked it or not. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Some relatives avoided me, their discomfort obvious and unspoken. My mother floated through the house, quieter than ever, but she started leaving tea on my nightstand each morning. The kind gesture of a woman who had forgotten how else to show love. My father mowed the lawn, washed dishes, did all the small chores he had neglected before. Every so often, he would pause in a doorway and look at me, like he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Lisa visited daily. She checked in on me, sometimes just sitting in my old bedroom, flipping through old photo albums, laughing at our childhood fashion disasters. "I wish I had known. I wish I could have helped," she said one night, hugging me tightly. I pressed my face into her shoulder and let myself cry, a rare gift, that permission to grieve in front of someone who truly cared. Other family members began reaching out, tentatively at first. A cousin texted late at night, saying she believed me. My aunt sent a card, apologizing for the pain that had lingered in our family's core. There were still critics. Some whispered that I had brought shame, that stirring the past did nothing but fracture us further. But more often, there were moments of new honesty. Elders asking hesitant questions, children sensing that something deep had shifted. I took long walks through the old neighborhood, stepping over cracked sidewalks mottled with sunlight from the yards. I visited playgrounds I had once escaped to as a frightened child and watched kids swirl down plastic slides, their laughter ringing out, a reminder that innocence can exist even in the places where darkness once lived. For the first time, the streets didn't feel haunted. The shadows attached to every familiar landmark started to lift. It would be a lie to say, "I forgave Andrew," or that justice had a neat ending. He remained absent, a ghost in birthday pictures, a name barely spoken. Sometimes at night, I wondered if he thought about us, about the women he'd hurt. Did he tell himself another story, one where he was the victim? Or did he realize the enormity of what he'd done? I understood, finally, that his journey was not mine to finish. My role was no longer to carry his sins, but to claim my peace and help build a future where secrets no longer thrived. The weeks became months, and I decided to stay a little longer in California than planned. I started therapy again, this time with a Vietnamese American counselor my cousin recommended. The sessions were hard, sometimes excruciating, digging through language and culture and tangled family loyalties, rewriting my understanding of what survival looked like. My therapist reminded me that returning didn't mean reliving. It could also mean rewiring, learning how to feel safe in my own skin, even in the place where it all began. Gradually, my relationship with my parents changed in subtle ways. My mother started speaking in tentative apologies. "I hope you find happiness, even if not here." She offered stories from her village in Vietnam, moments of fear and struggle from her own past that she had never shared before. My father, in his spare, awkward way, wanted to show he was trying. He cooked my favorite childhood meals, stood by me in the garden, listened to my scattered stories about Chicago. I saw in them not cartoons of good or bad parents, but two flawed people, survivors who loved clumsily and had passed on both hope and pain to their daughter. There were setbacks, days when my mother reverted to old ways, bristling at reminders of the past, or when an offhand comment from a relative reignited old wounds. There were also new joys: cousins inviting me out to karaoke, Lisa organizing family brunches, where laughter replaced some of the heaviness at the table. I found myself laughing again, more present, less brittle. The world did not erase the pain, but it made room for growth and something like grace. I also began to speak openly in my community, volunteering with support groups for other Asian American survivors. My story became not just about what I had endured, but about what was possible. I spoke at a panel for local high schoolers, not naming Andrew, but laying bare the cost of silence, the ache of truth, and the hard-earned relief of being believed. Afterward, a girl approached me, tears in her eyes, and said, "Thank you for reminding me that the worst thing is not the end." Her courage echoed mine. Her hope became mine to hold as well. As the months drew to a close, I realized the confrontation with my family was not a single war, but many small battles, some won, some lost, most ongoing. Healing was not a destination, but a practice, a daily choice to be present with myself and with others, to let light into the rooms I once kept locked. I found myself looking at old wounds with less shame and more acceptance, aware that survival did not make me weak, but resilient. That final weekend, before returning to Chicago, I sat with my parents in the backyard, surrounded by late summer roses. We spoke about ordinary things: weather, food, the neighbor's new dog. But beneath it, there was a softness I hadn't felt since childhood, a tentative peace. My mother hugged me longer this time. My father, awkward as always, placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "I want you to be proud, not just of family, but yourself. You keep going." As my flight took off, I looked down at the map of streets I once thought I'd never escape, feeling gratitude and grief in equal measure. I'd returned, and I hadn't lost myself. I'd walked into the fire of truth and come out, scarred, but still here, still holding on to hope for the next day and the next. Conclusion: the price of blindness. As I sit here, years away from the place and time that shaped me, the weight of my family's story, my story, lingers in the quiet air around me, reflecting on all that I've endured, on the trauma and truth that finally emerged after so many years in the dark. I realize what I carry forward with me is not just pain, but a hard-won understanding. The price of blindness is always greater than we imagine. And sometimes, what we lose in refusing to see is not just our innocence, but the chance for something better. The story I've told is one of survival, yes, but also one of warning. I want to make it clear that my journey isn't unique. There are thousands, maybe millions of families just like mine, stitched together with sacrifice, tradition, and love, but also pulled apart by denial, shame, and a desperate need to maintain appearances. Why does blindness, willful or not, cost us so much? What is it that we cling to, that makes us look away, even, or maybe especially, when the truth is begging us to look closer. For my family, it all started with dreams. My parents crossed an ocean, hoping to outrun the ghosts of war and hunger, believing that America would repay their faith with a clean slate and ceaseless opportunity. I know now, as an adult, how frightening and lonely that journey must have been. Learning a new language, one halting syllable at a time, stockpiling every dollar, bending under the weight of expectation. We built our identity on survival, on the idea that family comes first, that protecting one another is the highest calling. But somewhere in that noble intention, we grew afraid of what it might cost us to see something terrible within our own walls, afraid of what others might say if our secrets were laid bare. The blindness began as a kind of armor. I remember my mother's hands, skilled, quick, calloused from years spent peeling shrimp, folding dumplings, scrubbing sinks. She never looked at me quite the same way after my confession. Her gaze skirted past mine, the way one avoids a wound too deep to probe. That was her way of loving me, I told myself. If she didn't see it, maybe it would heal. If she pretended long enough, maybe I would become whole again on my own. My father, always silent, retreated into even quieter places, his words withering under the pressure, his presence a ghostly comfort. The more I needed support, the further away both my parents seemed to drift. There were unspoken rules. Don't talk about Andrew. Don't admit to anger. Don't ever let the neighbors suspect we were anything but a good, strong, immigrant family. That silence became the glue holding us together, and the fissure splitting us apart. Blindness, I learned, doesn't just mean closing your eyes. Sometimes it's a trick of the heart, a willingness to edit your own memory, to let guilt swirl and settle like silt in your bloodstream until you no longer recognize your own suffering. I became an expert at pretending, dressing up my grief in achievement and politeness. To outsiders, I was just another overachieving Asian American student, eager to prove her worth. Beneath that veneer, I was drowning. The price of blindness was steep. It cost me my childhood, my sense of safety, my ability to trust. But what hurts most, even now, is knowing that it also cost me the possibility of intimacy with my family. The kind of closeness that can only come when people are brave enough to share the most painful parts of themselves. It's a cruel paradox. We keep secrets to protect one another, but in so doing, we lose connection. We become actors in a drama written generations ago, doomed to repeat the same tragedies until someone finds the courage to stop the play. I wish I could say confronting the truth changed everything, that it healed old wounds, that my family came together in recognition and love. In reality, the truth fractured us. Some relatives called me reckless, selfish for reopening wounds that had nearly scarred over. Some, like my cousin Lisa, became unexpected allies, their own silences collapsing under the weight of my confession. But my parents, their journey toward vision has been slow, uncertain, at times painful to witness. My mother, for all her strength, still doubts her choices, still wonders if believing me meant losing her only son. My father struggles to find words when we talk about the past, searching for a language sturdy enough to hold both love and regret. Yet, even fractured, we are freer than before. Honesty has made the air easier to breathe. The ache of loss is real, but so is the sense that, finally, I'm living in a place where I can name what happened to me, and, by naming it, rob it of some of its power. Blindness, in its most subtle and insidious form, is fueled by silence. The greatest rebellion, I've discovered, is to break that silence, to risk being seen in all my wounded, complicated, hopeful humanity. Over the years, as I've shared my story with others, first in therapy rooms, then in survivor groups, and eventually in larger communities, a quiet revolution has begun. Every time someone thanks me for breaking my own family's silence, every time I see the flicker of recognition and grief in another survivor's eyes, I am reminded that this fight is bigger than myself. The price we pay for blindness can't be measured only in broken families or fractured dreams. It's measured in the opportunities lost to shame, in the love withheld in the name of pride, in the years spent waiting for someone else to make it safe to speak. Sometimes I think of Andrew, not with forgiveness, and not always with anger, but with a kind of resignation. His refusal to acknowledge the harm he caused is the most perfect form of blindness I know. I have let go of the need to change him. His journey is not mine to salvage. My responsibility is to myself, to the women he hurt, to the children in homes like mine, waiting desperately for someone to turn on the light. I don't know what the future holds for my family. Some rifts may never heal. Some stories may always be told in half shadows. But I no longer feel imprisoned by the fear that my pain makes me less worthy of belonging. If anything, it's the searching for truth and the willingness to bear witness to suffering, my own and others, that has given me back my sense of self. To those reading, to every young woman or man hiding behind the walls of a family, too afraid to face their own reflection, please know that your story matters. Your voice has power, even if it trembles, even if it shakes the foundations of what you've always believed was home. Blindness isn't always chosen, but sight is, a decision to see and keep seeing, even when it hurts. The price of blindness is high. It costs you your relationships, your confidence, sometimes even your sense of right and wrong. But the price of opening your eyes is not shame or exile. It's freedom, hard-won and messy, yes, but real. It is the only hope we have of breaking the cycles that bind us, of forging a legacy our children won't have to run from. As for me, I am still healing. My journey isn't linear. There are days when the weight of what I've lost drags at me, when anger or sadness feels fresh as ever. But there's also beauty in the struggle, clarity, resilience, moments of joy I once thought were lost to me forever. I am not defined by what happened or by my family's blindness. I am defined by my ability to see things clearly, even when others cannot. I have learned that home isn't a place or even a people. It is the courage to tell the truth, to believe yourself, to let in the light after so many years in the dark. This is the real inheritance my parents gave me. Not just the wounds, but the tools to grow past them. Stubbornness, hope, and the refusal to live forever with eyes closed. If they could survive a war, an ocean, and a new world, then so can I survive the hardest truths of my life. May this story be a lantern for anyone fumbling through darkness. May it remind you that seeing, truly seeing, isn't a betrayal. It's an act of love, for yourself, for others, and, if you're lucky, one day, for your family too.